Dive into the raw, unfiltered power struggle at the heart of American politics with Karoline now. Subscribe, like, and drop your thoughts in the comments, where the truth meets fearless analysis. The gilded facade of America's most scrutinized marriage began to fracture under the weight of public revelation, not with a whisper, but with the thunderous echo of entertainment industry giants who dared to pull back the curtain. Melania Trump, the enigmatic former First Lady who had perfected the art of stoic dignity, found herself at the epicenter of a cultural earthquake. Jimmy Kimmel had aired the private laundry of the Trump household with his signature sardonic precision, while Sher's unfiltered commentary cut through the carefully constructed image of marital solidarity with surgical accuracy. "She hates him," Sher had proclaimed to a captivated audience, her words hanging in the air like a verdict from which there could be no appeal. "She never expected him to win. She doesn't want to be in the White House." Behind the mansion walls, and away from the choreographed photo opportunities, a tempest was brewing. Sources close to the former First Lady reported an ice-cold fury that contradicted her public composure. For years, Melania had carried the burden of a partnership defined by political necessity rather than emotional connection, a weight that had become increasingly unbearable. Donald Trump, meanwhile, maintained his characteristic bravado, dismissing the revelations as fabrications from his enemies. But the cracks were evident to those who knew where to look. The mechanical hand-holding, the subtle flinches when cameras captured unguarded moments, the separate bedrooms quietly acknowledged by White House staff. The American public found itself in the uncomfortable position of voyeur to a disintegrating marriage, one that had once stood as a symbol of aspirational wealth and power. Some questioned the ethics of such intimate exposure, others argued that those who seek the highest office forfeit their right to privacy. The battle lines were drawn not just between husband and wife, but across a deeply divided nation. What began as celebrity gossip had transformed into something far more consequential, a metaphor for the fragility of political alliances and the cost of ambition. The private pain of a former First Lady had become ammunition in a larger cultural war, where personal vulnerabilities were exploited for political advantage. As the story unfolded across media platforms, one thing became abundantly clear: in American politics, nothing remains sacred, not even the bonds of matrimony. The Trump marriage had become yet another battlefield in a nation's struggle to define its values and determine who deserves power and influence. The question now hanging in the balance: would Melania finally break her silence and tell her own story, or would she continue to bear the burden of appearances for the sake of the Trump dynasty? The answer would reverberate far beyond the personal, sending shockwaves through the political landscape that neither Jimmy Kimmel nor Sher could have fully anticipated when they first cast their stones at the glass house of America's most controversial couple. As the fragile facade of Trump's marriage lay exposed in the harsh spotlight of public scrutiny, another formidable voice entered the arena. Sher, cultural icon and unapologetic truth-teller, stepped forward with the practiced precision of someone who had spent decades refusing to mince words. Unlike the political operators who carefully calibrated their criticisms, Sher's assessment came unclouded by any need for diplomatic restraint. Her words sliced through the media noise with surgical brutality. "He's unattractive inside and out," she declared, her voice carrying the weight of someone who had witnessed enough of America's political theater to recognize authentic character. "You can put him in a golden room, and he still looks like a guy with a comb-over." The audience's nervous laughter barely masked their collective recognition of a deeper truth being spoken. This wasn't merely aesthetic criticism, it was a dismantling of the carefully constructed image of power and success that had propelled Trump to the presidency. With each observation, Sher methodically deconstructed the myth of the man. She didn't attack his policies or even his politics. Instead, she targeted something far more devastating: his fundamental essence. The flaws she identified weren't partisan talking points, but human failings that transcended political divides. Her calm delivery stood in stark contrast to the chaos she described: a man perpetually creating disorder, demanding attention, and consuming oxygen from every room he entered. The critique resonated not because it was political, but because it was personal, striking at the insecurities that drove Trump's relentless pursuit of adoration. As video clips of her comments ricocheted across social media platforms, they crystallized something the American public had sensed but couldn't articulate. Beneath the bombast and bluster lay profound vulnerability. Trump supporters rallied in his defense, but Sher's observations had already penetrated the protective armor of tribal politics. This wasn't simply another celebrity feud. It represented the deepening fault lines in American culture, a war being waged not just over policy or governance, but over fundamental values and character. Sher had become a reluctant general in this cultural conflict, wielding words that exposed the emperor's new clothes for what they truly were. In the wake of her comments, Trump's team scrambled to redirect the narrative. But some truths, once spoken, cannot be unheard. Sher had accomplished what countless political opponents had failed to achieve. She had momentarily stripped away the mythology surrounding the man and forced America to confront what lay beneath. As the media cycle churned forward, one question lingered in the national consciousness. How had America reached a point where the most cutting political analysis came not from journalists or elected officials, but from a singer who simply refused to participate in the collective pretense that had come to define American politics? The battlefield of American politics rarely sees warriors more effective than those who wield humor as their weapon. Into this arena stepped George Clooney and Jimmy Kimmel, celebrities whose attacks on Trump transcended mere entertainment to become surgical strikes against his carefully crafted mythology. Clooney, with his Hollywood pedigree and political connections, possessed something Trump could never manufacture: authentic gravitas. His recollections of encounters with Trump carried the weight of first-hand witness. He was completely unprepared, Clooney revealed about a private meeting, his tone more pitying than accusatory. He asked questions that demonstrated a fundamental lack of understanding about basic governmental functions. It wasn't just political disagreement. It was watching someone drowning in a position they were never equipped to hold. Unlike partisan attacks, Clooney's observations landed with devastating credibility, the testimony of someone who had seen behind the curtain of power and found not a wizard, but an imposter. Meanwhile, Jimmy Kimmel had transformed his late-night platform into a nightly dissection of Trump's character flaws. His approach wasn't the traditional punchline-driven comedy, but something more meticulously designed: systematic exposure through sustained ridicule. It's remarkable, Kimmel mused to his audience, how someone can simultaneously have the thinnest skin and the thickest skull in American history. The audience laughter couldn't disguise the uncomfortable truth Kimmel had laid bare, that America had elevated to its highest office a man whose intellectual curiosity extended no further than his own reflection. What made these celebrity interventions so potent wasn't their reach but their resonance. They spoke to the growing cognitive dissonance in American life, where citizens were asked to deny what their eyes and ears told them was true. Trump's counterattacks proved predictably personal and petty. Low-rated Jimmy Kimmel, he sneered on social media. Overrated Clooney hasn't had a hit in years. But these dismissals only reinforced the very critique being leveled against him. A man incapable of addressing substance, retreating always to schoolyard taunts. The true power of these celebrity critiques lay in their ability to penetrate defenses that political arguments couldn't breach. Viewers who had long ago fortified themselves against opposing ideologies found their walls unexpectedly scaled by the Trojan horse of entertainment. As video clips circulated beyond their original broadcast contexts, they created an alternative narrative, one where Trump wasn't a strong man but a punchline, not a strategic genius, but a simple mark. In the court of public opinion, ridicule can prove more damaging than rage, and laughter more lasting than lectures. Perhaps most telling was what these exchanges revealed about the nature of American power itself, how the boundaries had blurred between entertainment and governance, between celebrity and authority. The jesters had become the truth-tellers in a kingdom where the emperor's nakedness could no longer be ignored. The battle for America's future was being waged not just in legislative chambers and courtrooms, but on late-night television and award ceremony stages. And in that particular theater of war, Trump found himself increasingly outmatched by opponents who understood his greatest vulnerability: that beneath his fury lay the desperate fear of being laughed at. The political landscape of America has always been treacherous terrain, but few phenomena capture its volatility like the calculated metamorphosis of Ja Vance. Cal Morgan observes the spectacle with clinical precision. A man who once denounced Trump as America's Hitler now genuflects before him with the fervor of the converted. Vance's transformation wasn't the stumbling recalibration of a politician finding his voice. It was architectural, each pivot meticulously engineered, each renunciation precisely timed. The Rhodes Scholar who once articulated the pain of Appalachia in best-selling prose had discovered a more lucrative market, trafficking in the very resentments he had formerly diagnosed. Trump makes people I care about afraid, Vance had written in 2016, his words etched in digital stone. Immigrants, Muslims, etc. Because of this, I find him reprehensible. 4 years later, these principles dissolved like sugar in rain, inconvenient artifacts from a discarded identity. What makes Vance's transformation so emblematic isn't merely its cynicism, but its transparency. He executed his reversal without the customary veneer of evolved thinking. The calculation was naked, the ambition undisguised. In the chambers of power, such maneuvers might be rewarded, but beyond Washington's marble corridors, voices like Representative Jasmine Crockett's slice through the manufactured fog with clarifying fury. "They're telling lies they know are lies," Crockett thundered from the House floor, her voice steady but vibrating with controlled rage. "And those lies are putting targets on the backs of Americans. This isn't political theater, it's endangering lives." Crockett represents a counterforce in American politics, figures who treat truth not as malleable clay, but as foundations that, once compromised, threaten the entire structure. Her confrontations aren't calibrated for viral moments, but emerge from the recognition that silence equals complicity. "When we allow lies to stand unchallenged," she continued, "we become architects of our own destruction." The contrast between Vance and Crockett illuminates the fault lines fracturing American political discourse. On one side stand the strategists of expediency, treating conviction as currency to be traded in pursuit of power. On the other stand the guardians of accountability, for whom truth serves as both compass and shield. What's most revealing is the asymmetry of their respective costs. Vance's shapeshifting elevated him to the Senate, his former criticisms dismissed as youthful indiscretions. Crockett's consistency has made her a target, her truth-telling branded as partisan aggression rather than necessary vigilance. This is the perverse calculus of modern politics, where adaptation is rewarded more richly than adherence, where the ability to discard yesterday's convictions becomes evidence not of moral bankruptcy, but tactical brilliance. As the political ecosystem splinters further, these divergent approaches represent competing evolutionary strategies. The question that lingers, unanswered but urgent, is which adaptation better ensures survival: the chameleon's capacity for camouflage, or the oak's resolute refusal to bend? The stakes of this contest extend beyond individual careers. They reach into the very possibility of governance itself. Whether a system designed for principled disagreement can function when principles themselves become negotiable assets rather than immovable boundaries. In the fracturing mirror of American politics, we glimpse not just competing ideologies but competing realities. Parallel universes where facts dissolve into preference and history becomes malleable narrative. The fragmentation is complete, the common ground eroded, and the path forward increasingly obscured by tactical smoke and strategic mirrors. While the chameleon politicians of Washington perfect their ideological costumes, Cal Morgan turns his unflinching gaze to a battlefield of far greater consequence, the economic showdown between America and China that threatens to reshape the global order itself. A $1 trillion sword dangles above the American economy, gleaming with malicious potential. China, wielding its massive holdings of U.S. Treasury bonds, signals its readiness to unleash financial chaos in response to Trump's escalating trade aggression. This is not merely a diplomatic disagreement, it is economic warfare, executed through spreadsheets and market signals rather than missiles and troops. "We have 1,000 ways to make America suffer," one Chinese official remarked behind closed doors, the threat delivered with bureaucratic calm that only heightened its menace. The arsenal deployed by both sides grows more sophisticated by the day. Precision-targeted tariffs slice through supply chains with surgical cruelty. Export restrictions choke access to critical technologies. Currency manipulations ripple through global markets, creating tsunamis from ripples. What began as political posturing has metastasized into a full-spectrum economic confrontation. The battlefield extends beyond the abstract realm of international finance into the intimate territory of American households. In Michigan, a factory worker watches his company relocate production overseas to escape retaliatory Chinese tariffs. In California, a tech entrepreneur sees her components double in price as supply chains fracture along geopolitical fault lines. In Iowa, farmers watch their soybeans rot in silos as Chinese buyers vanish overnight. Unlike traditional conflicts with their clear battle lines and identifiable combatants, this economic war operates in shadows and abstractions, its casualties disguised as market corrections and business failures. The American consumer, conscripted without consent, shoulders the hidden tax of escalating hostilities through higher prices on everyday goods. Beneath the surface skirmishes lies a deeper, more consequential contest, a struggle for technological supremacy that will determine the economic architecture of the coming decades. Semiconductor manufacturing, artificial intelligence research, quantum computing advancements, these are the true strategic highlands in this conflict, territories whose control promises dominance long after current politicians have faded from memory. China's strategy reveals patience and foresight, each move calculated not for immediate advantage, but positioned within a decades-long vision of economic ascendancy. American responses, by contrast, lurch between administrations, tactical rather than strategic, reactive rather than visionary. "They're playing Go while we're playing checkers," admits a former Treasury official, the frustration evident in his voice. "They're thinking 20 moves ahead while we can barely plan past the next election cycle." Moreover, this economic confrontation threatens to unravel the intricate web of global trade that has defined the post-Cold War era. Supply chains spanning continents fragment along ideological lines. Strategic industries retreat behind national borders. The elegant efficiency of global capitalism gives way to the jealous protectionism of economic nationalism. The stakes extend beyond balance sheets and GDP figures. At risk is America's ability to finance its debt, fund its military, and maintain the dollar's privileged position as the world's reserve currency, the invisible foundation upon which American power has rested for generations. As financial markets gyrate in response to each new threat and countermeasure, one truth emerges with brutal clarity. In this borderless economic battlefield, there are no safe zones, no civilians granted immunity from the crossfire. This is a conflict waged in boardrooms and trading floors, yet its consequences will reshape kitchen tables and retirement accounts across America with the same devastating efficiency as any conventional war. The economic brinkmanship between these superpowers reveals a fundamental truth that transcends the personalities dominating political headlines, that beneath the theater of democratic politics lies the cold mathematics of power, where nations calculate advantage with merciless precision, and where miscalculation carries consequences that no election can undo. While nations wage economic warfare across global markets, Cal Morgan shifts his analytical lens to a different battlefield, one where tech titans, comedians, and politicians collide in a spectacle, revealing the razor's edge between loyalty and national security. Bill Burr stands alone on a dimly lit stage, his trademark Boston cadence slicing through the veneer of Silicon Valley mythology. The comedian dissects Elon Musk's carefully constructed empire with surgical precision, each punchline peeling back layers of the tech mogul's cultivated mystique. "This guy's not Tony Stark," Burr declares, his words landing like artillery shells. "He's just another billionaire with a Twitter account and government contracts." The audience erupts in laughter, but beneath the comedy lies a devastating critique that reverberates through corridors of power. Burr's comedic vivisection arrives at a moment of heightened tension, days after Musk's closed-door Pentagon briefing raised eyebrows across Washington's national security establishment. Inside those classified sessions, Musk presented technological capabilities and strategic assessments that would normally require the highest security clearances. Access granted, despite his increasingly erratic public commentary and deepening entanglements with foreign governments. Behind the sealed doors of Mar-a-Lago, Donald Trump monitors these developments with mounting fury. The former president, ordinarily quick to embrace allies with media platforms, issues an uncharacteristically sharp rebuke. "Elon needs to remember where his bread is buttered," Trump tells confidants, the warning carrying unmistakable menace. "Pentagon access is a privilege, not a right." The fracture reveals a fundamental tension at the heart of America's power structure, where personal loyalty and national security imperatives collide with devastating force. Career intelligence officials watch this drama unfold with growing alarm, their concerns transcending partisan divides. "We're seeing unprecedented access granted based on personality cults rather than security protocols," confides one senior intelligence veteran, speaking on condition of anonymity. The national security apparatus wasn't designed to withstand this kind of stress test. Musk's response comes not through conventional channels but through algorithmic manipulation, a subtle recalibration of his social media platform's recommendation engine that suddenly amplifies voices critical of the Pentagon's procurement processes. This digital salvo demonstrates the asymmetrical power wielded by tech leaders who control the very information infrastructure upon which modern governance depends. The conflict escalates beyond personality clashes into a high-stakes battle over who ultimately controls America's technological future. Military planners quietly update contingency scenarios, gaming out what critical systems might be compromised should tech leaders prioritize personal vendettas over national interests. As these titans clash in public and private arenas, ordinary citizens become unwitting pawns in their power struggle. The algorithms shaping daily information diets shift imperceptibly, engineering consent and manufacturing outrage with mathematical precision. This is warfare by other means, battles fought not with missiles and troops but with server farms and influence operations. The collateral damage manifests not in physical destruction but in the erosion of shared reality itself. The spectacle reveals the fragility of institutions once considered impervious to personal whims. When billionaires who control critical infrastructure collide with political forces, the resulting shockwaves threaten foundations more essential than most citizens realize. In this treacherous landscape, comedy becomes the last refuge of unvarnished truth. Bill Burr's routine, seemingly just entertainment, serves as reconnaissance, mapping the fault lines between tech power, political loyalty, and national security that may ultimately determine America's future. The geopolitical chess match unfolds in stark relief as Cal Morgan's analytical gaze turns eastward, where Ukraine stands at a precipice that will define not just its future but the balance of global power itself. In the silent corridors of Kyiv's presidential palace, Volodymyr Zelensky paces beneath the weight of an impossible choice. Before him lie two documents. One bearing American signatures, promising immediate prosperity through exclusive mineral extraction rights. The other, a stern diplomatic cable from Berlin warning of consequences should Ukraine bypass European Union regulatory frameworks. This decision transcends economics, whispers a senior Ukrainian advisor, eyes darting nervously between the competing proposals. It's about who will shape our children's future. The mineral deposits in question, critical for advanced battery technology and renewable energy systems, represent more than mere resources. They are the physical manifestation of tomorrow's geopolitical leverage. Whoever controls these elements controls the infrastructure of coming decades. German officials have made their position unambiguous. Any agreement that circumvents established EU procurement standards undermines the very partnership Ukraine claims to seek, declares the terse communiqué from Berlin. The statement, diplomatic in language but unmistakable in intent, carries the collective weight of European integration, a dream Ukraine has pursued through blood and sacrifice. Meanwhile, American negotiators press their advantage, offering terms that would inject billions into Ukraine's war-ravaged economy within months rather than years. The proposal promises immediate relief to a nation whose infrastructure lies in ruins, whose citizens endure daily hardships most Americans can scarcely imagine. Sometimes survival today must take precedence over perfect alignment tomorrow, argues the U.S. Special Envoy, his tone blending sympathy with calculated pressure. In secure video consultations, Zelensky's face betrays the burden of leadership in an age where every decision is scrutinized through competing ideological lenses. The mineral deal, ostensibly a straightforward economic arrangement, has become a referendum on Ukraine's very orientation. East or west, pragmatism or principle, immediate relief or long-term strategy. European diplomats work feverishly behind the scenes, leveraging cultural ties and shared democratic values to counter America's financial firepower. Remember who stood with you when others merely watched. One senior EU representative reminds Ukrainian officials, the statement both genuine and tactically precise. On the ground, ordinary Ukrainians remain oblivious to these high-stakes negotiations, their daily struggles with power outages and reconstruction efforts continuing, regardless of which superpower ultimately secures access to their nation's subterranean wealth. What unfolds in Ukraine represents not merely a commercial transaction but a template for how middle powers must navigate a world increasingly defined by great power competition. Each diplomatic cable, each proposal revision, each private assurance carries implications that will reverberate through NATO headquarters and Kremlin war rooms alike. As dawn breaks over Kyiv, Zelensky stands at his office window, watching his capital city stir to life. The decision before him, seemingly about minerals and money, will, in truth, determine whether Ukraine remains master of its own destiny or becomes merely another battlefield, where greater powers contest tomorrow's resources using yesterday's tactics of influence and coercion. In this moment, Ukraine's dilemma mirrors the fundamental challenge facing democracies worldwide: how to preserve sovereignty and strategic autonomy when caught between competing systems that each demand exclusive loyalty as the price of protection. In a turbulent political landscape where personas clash and power is mercilessly contested, the truth remains the most potent weapon. Behind every public spectacle lies deeper conflicts, personal, political, and global, that shape the fate of nations and the daily lives of citizens. Karoline now reminds us that vigilance, courage, and clarity are essential to deciphering the noise and holding those who wield power accountable. The fight for truth is never silent, and in this relentless arena, the stakes could not be higher.